3 violins, a VSO, a violin with traditional pegs, and a violin with geared pegs. And we're gonna see which one wins out when it comes to tuning. Something popped. I'm Laura. I'm a violin teacher, a bird watcher,
an eagle! Wow!
And I'm the creator of Meadowlark Violin Studio, a violin membership to help people like you on your violin journey. And one of the reasons I started creating online violin resources was because of pegs. When I first started teaching, I had so many students showing up with violins that were impossible to tune. So I started a website and wrote my first blog to help my future students make smart choices when it came to buying violins. Now, tuning the violin sounds like a basic beginner skill that you learn in the first lesson. But if you play violin, you know that tuning the instrument is not always that easy. Now, depending on the type of equipment you are using, tuning can range from an easy 5-second checkup to a 10-minute ordeal that sometimes ends with a lot of frustration and maybe even a broken string. Now, it's very important to tune the violin every single time before you start playing. That's because learning to place your fingers is all about ear training and muscle memory. And if the pitch of the open string is slightly different every time you play, then you'll never develop that essential muscle memory or train your ear to be discerning. So even though you should tune every time before you play, on average, it shouldn't take you, I would say, more than a minute. And if it does, it could be because you have some issues with your pegs. So I think of pegs as falling into 3 broad categories. There are traditional friction pegs, VSO pegs, and geared pegs. Now you may be saying, wait, what about the fine tuners? Yes, fine tuners are installed on the tailpiece on most beginner violins, and most beginner violins come with 4 fine tuners. Now these make small adjustments to the pitch. And even if you have fine tuners, you will still have to mess with the pegs on a fairly regular basis. So traditional pegs, which are on most violins, are wooden pegs that are inserted into a hole in a wooden peg box. Now they rely on friction to tune the string. Traditional pegs have been used for hundreds of years, but when you have a wooden peg inserted into a wooden peg box, you can imagine as wood swells and shrinks with the changes in weather and humidity, or as your strings stretch out or maybe start to get old, tuning with traditional pegs can be a little tricky. And when you're tuning with traditional pegs, you have to learn this skill of turning the peg while simultaneously gently pushing inward to keep the peg from slipping. Tuning with traditional pegs can range from not a problem at all to somewhat frustrating to extremely embarrassing. For instance, if you play an orchestra, or you plan to, this will happen to you at some point. The oboe gives an A, everyone starts tuning, and for whatever reason, you're really struggling to get your strings to cooperate. And you watch in horror as everyone else finishes up tuning and you're still wrangling with your A string. That's when the panic will start to set in, and you can't just quit tuning because it's pretty obvious you're not in tune. The conductor will give you this little impatient keep going motion. They might even ask the oboe to give you another A, and then you get to tune with the whole orchestra watching you. Yep, I've been there before. Now, that's just traditional pegs. They have their moments. When it comes to traditional pegs and VSO pegs, there's one major difference. Traditional pegs that are installed on a good quality beginner violin have been carefully fitted to each peg hole by a trained luthier. So every violin is unique, and every peg and every peg hole are unique as well. Not necessarily so with VSOs. Now, VSO is a standard term that we use for a violin-shaped object, meaning it looks like a violin, but that's kind of where the similarities end. These are very cheaply made instruments for sale on large online stores that sell everything, and these VSOs are often pretty unplayable. And there's a couple reasons why VSOs might have some serious tuning problems. The wood in the peg box or the pegs may not have been dried completely. They may have the wrong type of wood for the peg. I've even seen VSOs with plastic pegs, which means the violin will never stay in tune. Even if the pegs are made of wood, remember the pegs have to be carefully fitted to the violin peg box. And if the pegs don't really fit, you will always have issues with tuning. Now, that means the violin will be extremely hard to get exactly in tune, or the violin won't stay in tune at all. The newest kid on the block when it comes to pegs are geared pegs. These are pegs that look exactly like traditional pegs, but they have gears inside of the peg head or the shaft that allow you to easily tune the violin, kind of the same way you would tune a guitar or a mandolin. Now, geared pegs are not as susceptible to changes in weather, they stay in tune more, and when it comes to changing strings, it's much easier. You don't really have to worry about geared pegs slipping and unwinding completely, so you don't have to do that whole gymnastic routine with your hands just to apply pressure. So I was first introduced to geared pegs when I bought my violin Maria. She had geared pegs installed and I never went back after that. I get geared pegs installed on all of my violins. So let's see which peg wins out when it comes to a tuning competition. The first thing I had to do was install the bridge on my VSO because it didn't come with the bridge installed. Then I untuned all of the violins to replicate what they might sound like when you first receive them in the mail. And then I started tuning. Something popped. So, big surprise, geared pegs win. And I think the biggest difference when it comes to geared pegs is how smoothly and gradually they adjust the pitch. And that particularly makes a difference on the E string. The E string is the most common string to break, and everyone will break an E string at some point. And that's usually because you're using traditional pegs, which make those really big adjustments. So it can be easy to over tighten the E string and then not quite realize it, and then it breaks. Before I did this little tuning competition, I knew that geared pegs made tuning quicker, and part of that is because they don't slip or stick. They don't do that thing where the peg starts to unwind and you have to stop it and put more pressure in. All of that makes it quicker and easier to tune, but I think the thing that makes the biggest difference is how your ear can keep track of the pitch better. When you're using traditional pegs, the pitch is kind of jumping all over the place. It's kind of challenging to keep track of where you are. You have to do this little dance where you loosen the peg, you tighten it. You realize it's not close enough for the fine tuner, so you loosen again, tighten, loosen, tighten. And that just makes you lose kind of the sense of pitch that you're going for. Now, you can definitely use tuners to help you tune your violin, where the tuner tells you what pitch is being played. But these will give you notes that you're not even playing sometimes. Tuners can get very easily confused, so you do have to use your ear to help you out. And the geared pegs make it a lot easier to do that. Now, the Antonio Giuliani violin has really good well-fitted pegs on the violin, so there's absolutely nothing wrong with these pegs, and this is how traditional pegs should function. Now, when it came to tuning the VSO, it actually wasn't the worst VSO tuning experience I've ever had, but I think what threw me off the most is the sound. It sounds like a kazoo. And I kept double guessing myself. Like, I think that's tuned to an A, but it just sounds wrong. There's no resonance. It just sounds like some metal strings on a cardboard box. And when it comes to tuning, being able to hear that resonance and those overtones, even if you're just plucking the string, that makes a big difference. So geared pegs definitely save time when it comes to tuning. So why don't all violins come with geared pegs? Well, it is an upgrade, and you have to factor in the cost of the pegs and the labor to install them. Now, you can take any violin to your local luthier and have geared pegs installed. And one thing I do love about violin shops like Kennedy Violins is that you can have geared pegs installed on the violin before the violin is shipped to you. Now, you may be thinking, what about peg dope or peg drops? Now, these are compounds that are applied to the peg that can help relieve slipping or sticking. Now, the issue with these compounds is that if you use too much of it, then you're creating the opposite problem. So you can be continuously chasing slipping and sticking pegs. They're good to use in a pinch, but if you have issues with slipping or sticking pegs, or if you just want to avoid that, then you want to look for a longer term solution, and that's where geared pegs can help. With that being said, geared pegs might not be the best option for you right now. So let's talk about when this upgrade is worth it and when it's better to hold off. First, let's talk about when I definitely recommend geared pegs. If you are buying a violin for a child, I strongly recommend geared pegs. In fact, I think geared pegs should almost be required for children learning violin because the violin needs to be accurately tuned every single time it's played. And that is a skill that requires some precision that many young students struggle with. I was able to tune these violins with traditional pegs in a few minutes because I have years of tuning experience, so it will take you longer if you're just starting off. Now, if you, the adult, are there to help tune your child's instrument every time, that's great, but geared pegs will also save you time when it comes to tuning as well. Your child's orchestra teacher will also love you for geared pegs, or if your child is taking online violin lessons, I think they definitely need geared pegs as well. Geared pegs will also help them practice more. I can't tell you how many times a child has showed up to a lesson with a badly out of tune violin, and when I ask how long it's been out of tune, they'll say the entire week, and they haven't practiced because of it. Geared pegs can make those excuses go away. But geared pegs aren't just for children. If you're an adult, here are some reasons you may want to opt for geared pegs. You don't have a lot of musical experience. Maybe you've heard horror stories about tuning and you're a little nervous. If you're teaching yourself or if you're learning via the internet. If you live in an area with wild, sudden changes in the weather. If you have wrist or hand problems that make it difficult to turn the pegs. If you just don't want to bother spending a lot of time tuning every day. If you have limited time to practice, geared pegs can help save your practice time. Or if you're buying a nicer violin that you plan on keeping for a long time. Now, don't let this scare you away from traditional pegs, but if you just want tuning to be a little easier, geared pegs are amazing. Personally, I have years of tuning experience. I can tune a violin, and I still prefer geared pegs. And whether you choose traditional pegs or geared pegs, hopefully the main thing you get from all of this is that buying a violin from a good quality violin shop can make all the difference when it comes to tuning and playing your violin. I'm Laura from Meadowlark Violin. Happy practicing and happy tuning.